welcome back, bienvenue and all that jazz. It's time to talk about some books. It has been a hot minute since I have made a video, so hello. So nice to see you again, or nice to meet you for the first time if you have joined since the last time I made any kind of update. My plan for today's video is just to do kind of the beginning of a recent reads roundup. I haven't updated since maybe April reading wrap up. So I have May, June, and July to talk about, and I have been reading a ton. So today is just part one of this kind of wrap up, catch up style video. And so I'll just talk about the 8 books that I read in the month of May. And I would usually do statistics and stuff, but to be honest, I'm too lazy to do any math or like do anything kind of like that. So we're just gonna jump into this, and we're gonna go, as always, in ascending star order. And we will start with my least favorite book of the month and work our way all the way up to my most favorite book of the month. And so for my least favorite book of the month in May, that was Bride by Ali Hazelwood. It's a new science fiction fantasy romance, and the like smuttier style of like romance that tends to be more popular is just not my cup of tea. When like the kind of foundation of their relationship is built solely in like physical lust, I have a hard time like believing it or buying into it or like anything like that, you know what I mean? So like it doesn't feel like romance. It feels like PORN adjacent. And so I'm just like, it's just not, it doesn't speak to me. And like in this one in particular, the only Omegaverse style thing that I've ever read before was Squeak, which was a balloon animal shapeshifter smutty romance. And so I am familiar with the concepts of nodding and like some of the other like facets that make up the Omegaverse. And so that's not my issue with Bride. Like I know that I've seen some people be like, like clutching their pearls about it. And I'm just like, I mean, on the scale of weird things, it's not that bad. I don't know, the vampire politics felt kind of like Blade 2, but not as interesting, and just, I don't know, nothing about it really gripped me that much. The characters weren't my favorite, the romance wasn't my favorite, so like, it wasn't bad though, like, it was fine for what it was. Like, I'm not mad that I read it, I don't have any like deep-seated hatred towards Bride, I'm like, it was fine. It was something that I've read, so like, take that for what you will. And then up next, I read Toll the Hounds, and this is book, I don't even remember what number book this is. One second. What number are you? Book 8. Okay, so that's what I thought. So that is the last time that I read a Malazan book, because I've since read book 9, Dust of Dreams. So Toll the Hounds is book 8 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and it was kind of par for the course for what I expect from a Malazan book, so it got 3.5 stars for me. There just are elements of how Malazan is told that just don't personally jive with how I would like the story to be told. They feel intentionally like obfuscated, and like kind of all these weird circular arguments about philosophy that are sometimes hard to tell who is even thinking these things, because the philosophies between characters feel very similar. And so it's just par for the course. And as usual though, like Erikson tends to have a pretty explosive finale. So when we get to the part where the Hounds, the titular Hounds, are involved, like I had a lot of fun with it, but just the journey to get there is always kind of tedious for me. And I know people are always like, well, why don't you just stay in your lane, mind your own business? Like, I mean, at this point, I am 9 books into a 10-book series, so I shall be finishing. Probably next month, I will read the book 10, the conclusion of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I don't get particularly attached to the characters. I like the lore and the world building the best, but like, it is effort to like peel apart all of this like intentionally overwritten stuff to even get like to the meat of like, what is the world building? Because he's definitely one of those people that something that could have been said in 1 to 2 sentences instead is said in multiple paragraphs, if not multiple pages. And that just like, I don't find that fun. Like that, the experience of reading is not that fun for Malazan, but the like hindsight of like what the plot was and what had happened and like the world building implications and how the magic works, I think are really cool. And I enjoy reading it for those things. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say about Toll the Hounds. Like, it was another Malazan book that I have not read. I mean, probably when I fully finish Malazan, maybe I'll do a full, like, if anybody would even be interested in that, let me know. Like, I could talk about my full thoughts and maybe do some spoiler-free and some spoiler-filled thoughts for the entire Malazan Book of the Fallen, because I will have read all 10 books. So, like, if you would be interested in watching something like that, let me know, and I'll think about doing it. But with that being said, we'll move on to my other 3.5-star read of the month, and that was Wall of Storms by Ken Liu. This is book 2 in the Dandelion Dynasty. And so, people always say when they're reading the Dandelion Dynasty that book 1 is kind of like this prequel, and like to some extent, I agree. But then they say like book 2 is really where it like took off and like blew my mind, and like I don't know, like something about the way it's written is almost like this historical drama, I guess is like the closest thing I could like kind of equate it to, because it feels like mired in some of this like technical minutia that I don't really necessarily care about, but then at the same time things feel like very dramatized, and so it's just this weird kind of push-pull with me where like it's similar to kind of Malazan. Like in reflection, the things that happened I think are interesting, but the experience of reading them happening is not as interesting to me. So like, I don't know. If you really like kind of engineering and maybe how things could have been slightly different with like different engineering and like that kind of thing, and you like kind of historical feeling, like period drama style things, then I think that maybe the Dandelion Dynasty would really work for you. And I can't say if that continues because I haven't read books 3 and 4 yet. I still plan to at some point. It just hasn't been like the biggest priority because like I'm not in love with the Dandelion Dynasty. So, but I don't know, like it's just it's weird to me because like there are some aspects where I appreciate that he has thought through the details of how a specific weapon technology is inspired by an animal and how all the ramifications of how the creation process got it to be like weaponized. However, like I don't know that I need like the fake science of it all to like really like drill in that much, and there are periods where we do that, and so I think it's kind of also the whiplash of like feeling like we're telling a story and then wait a second, we're like jumping back in time to explain exactly how that thing was made and how it works to then jump forward. Like it's just a little, I don't know, like the non-linearness of it mixed with like the overemphasis on engineering mixed with this kind of like removed historical perspective where you're also watching things that are dramatized but like they're not emotionally affecting me because I'm kind of removed from the characters. It just makes for a kind of disorienting reading experience. But like I said, it's still 3.5 stars, so I think those are the things that hold it back from just being like a favorite, but it's still not a bad book by any means. And from here, we're going to transition. I have 2 4-star reads, and these were the 2 YA books that I read in the month of May. The first one I'll talk about is The Sky is Everywhere by Jandy Nelson. So I read the I'll Give You the Sun because Jashana, I'll link her channel, is obsessed and has told me for the longest time, I think you might really like I'll Give You the Sun. And so I tried it, loved it. And then I wanted to try her only other book that was currently available at the time. I've since read her new book, which is coming out in September. So stay tuned. I'll have a lot of thoughts on that because that book. But The Skies Everywhere is solid, but not my favorite thing because I think the magic of I'll Give You the Sun was partially in the multiple perspectives and partially in just the way that Jandy Nelson is able to use these kind of whimsical, nonsensical metaphors, but the metaphors are done in such a way that kind of evoke that feeling of childhood or transitioning into teenagerhood. And the writing style was still there in The Skies Everywhere. It just wasn't quite to the nth degree and quite as magical. And because The Skies Everywhere is following just the one main character and it's a female person falling in love, that it obviously doesn't resonate with me on the same way because I am not a female teenager falling in love. So, and I don't have that experience. It's not like nostalgic to me to be like, oh, I remember, you know? So like it was still really good and I enjoyed my reading experience with it, but it just didn't sit in my feels in the same way because in both of Jandy's other books, we have these really amazing queer characters that I love them. I love them. I love them. So, and The Skies Everywhere just wasn't quite that same magic for me, but still great. So if you like contemporary YA, I think it's still worth reading, but if you're just curious about Jandy Nelson and her like perfection in her authorial voice and writing style, then I would say try I'll Give You the Sun, or personally, my favorite is the one that's coming out in September, When the World Tips Over, but stay tuned for more thoughts on that. Then the other YA book that I read this month was The Spin of Fate, and it's by, I should know, by A.A. Vora. And this is a YA fantasy book where we were kind of in this world that the comp titles were like Avatar: The Last Airbender and Full Metal Alchemist, I want to say, and like I don't know. Like, I have a hard time when people say something is inspired by or like comp titles to this because I think I take them too literally. So I'm always like, well, there's not bending of elements, and like we're not like on a quest to save the world. I guess loosely, kind of, we're on the quest to save the world from a big bad, but that's like any fantasy that's not Avatar: The Last Airbender specific. And like Full Metal, my first experience with Full Metal was the original anime, not Brotherhood. That was like, I think it caught up to where the manga was and then past it, and so it's kind of its own thing, and it's very quite different in how it ends than Brotherhood. And so I just remember it's like so dark, and like it's about these brothers trying to like recover from this trauma, and like I'm like, not really. So Spin of Fate, sorry, I'm just ranting about all of these comp titles. So Spin of Fate is set in this world where there are different kind of like planes of existence almost that are kind of ascending in your karmic spin is what they call it. So basically, if you have, I think there's 4 of them. There's like the really bougie people, there's the good people, there's the neutral people, and then there's the bad people, right? And if you tend to be born into one of these spheres, and so a lot of the story looks at kind of like fate and like how could a system exist where people are predestined that they're already bad and deserve to grow up in these like heinous places where people have like horrific karma. And so we spend a lot of time kind of bucking against that and following some different perspectives, where at the very beginning of the story we are met with this girl who is in the like second to bottom plane. She's not in like evil place, she's in like not great place. And something happens and her spin increases, and so she gets immediately pulled into the good place. And so she spends a lot of time actually trying to like buck against that to get back, because her mom is in the not great place. And she ends up getting embroiled in this kind of revolutionary body of these people that exist in the very upper plane, and they are trying to like give aid to these lower places because they subscribe to that belief where it's like, how could somebody be intrinsically bad when they're born? And so there's a lot of really interesting things with the magic. It feels kind of like chi-esque, where you almost channel the energy around you into different manipulations. So I guess that's where it's kind of like Avatar: The Last Airbender, but it's not like elemental in the same way. It's not like people channel fire or channel earth or channel whatever. They channel like this native, almost spiritual chi of their environment and can manipulate it in different ways. So if you like really unique world building and just very different, like it feels very like Buddhist flavored in the kind of philosophies that we're discussing, I think it's really like can be quite thought provoking if you start kind of tackling some of the themes that it wrestles with throughout the story. And it also just has really cool creatures that you won't have seen before, like peacock snake things, like are on the cover. And it's just a really good time. And it was just a solid book. But I wasn't head over heels for any of the characters, or I think it took me a little while to kind of get settled in this magic system, because for a while I was like, are we just being preachy? And I was like, okay, no, we're really going somewhere with this. So I think it just took a second to get into, and because the characters weren't my favorite things ever, I think that's where it settled at kind of a 4-ish star experience for me. But I still would highly recommend you check it out if any of that sounds intriguing in any way. And with that, we will shift into my 2 4.5 star reads. The first one I will talk about is Reign and Ruin. And so this is a fantasy romance self-pub. It's available on Kindle Unlimited or whatever kind of thing you want to do. And it is the start of a fantasy romance series, but as I understand it, because again, this is another one that Jashana had been shouting about forever. And there is kind of like an overarching meta plot, but then each book follows like the kind of romance of a different couple as I understand it. I wouldn't know. I've only read the first book. But if you like political fantasy mixed with a really believable building of a real relationship, but there is still some spice, so I think that this is perfect for that realm of reader. We follow this daughter of the Sultan, and her dad is having really strong struggles of dementia, but she's trying to maintain like this iron grip on the power, because if the like advisors kind of get wind of it, they could try to like supplant her and take over. And so there's like all this political scheming going on that front. But then we have this other romantic relationship, and it's fantastic. So if you're at all interested in fantasy romance where it's like a 50-50 blend, or maybe like 60% fantasy, 40% romance, if you want something that's more in like that blendy blend and not as like relationship forward, I think that this could really work for you. It does definitely, I think the romance is still really important for the plot, so it definitely still sits in that kind of romance sphere, but the fantasy is well thought through, interesting. There are interesting twists and turns in the politics. The world building is cool. The magic is kind of elementally magic. So I think that like if you're interested in that style of fantasy romance where it's not just going to be like, oh, he's so huge. He's the biggest man I've ever seen and he just rails me until my brains fall out of my ears. Like if you want fantasy romance that doesn't do that, then I say maybe check out Reign and Ruin. And then my other 4.5 star read of the month is the Fireborne Blade. And this one is a new like novella series. I've read the second one as well. And the Fireborne Blade really focuses on kind of taking classic dragon fantasy and twisting it with kind of like horror elements. So we follow this kind of female knight as she's on this quest to reclaim the titular Fireborne Blade from a dragon's horde. And I don't want to say too much because it is a novella, but there just are some really interesting things about how the magic works and the world works when people are killed by dragons in their caves, because magic kind of can go wonky because dragons kind of just exude magic. They get trapped as dragon ghosts, and if you get touched by the ghost, they can cause you to be like haunted by their last moments for the rest of your life until you just kind of go crazy and or die. So there's just these really fascinating horror twists to things. I think it's just really fun. And if you like classic dragon fantasy, but you want those like twists, because it is very much cemented in stuff that we have been familiar with or have grown up to love or have nostalgia for. But I think those different elements really give it like its own flavor, and it makes it, okay, cats. Anyway, really give it like its own unique thing, and I would really highly recommend you check it out. And then the last thing I'll talk about, which is my favorite book that I read in the month of May, and that was Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. This is the conclusion to the Tawny Man trilogy, which is the third overall series in the larger realm of the Elderlings. I feel like if you're on BookTube in any way, you've heard about the realm of the Elderlings. And this was a 5-star read, so love that for me. There was 2 5-star reads in one Robin Hobb series. So far, Tawny Man has been my favorite trilogy in this entire world by far. And I think that's because books 1 and 3 in particular, book 2 was kind of slow and like more what I would consider regular Hobb, where it's kind of a little bit tedious. But books 1 and 3 really, I don't know, they just struck this way better balance where they were kind of a complete thought in and of themselves. Because a lot of times the way that Robin Hobb does an ending, plot-wise, kind of just feels rushed and kind of like phoned in, where it's so much more about the characters and sitting with them, which is great. But also, I would like the plot to still like conclude in a satisfying way. And just the lore that we got, the deeper lore about dragons and elderlings and how this magic works, and it gave kind of contextual hindsight to what had happened in the original Farseer trilogy and why the Red Raiders were red raiding, and kind of getting glimpses, because in this one we actually traveled to where the Red Raiders were coming from, that kind of island nation, on a quest to slay a dragon for reasons that I won't talk about because you need to read the books. But it was nice having that contextual information. I was not mad because it wasn't information that I needed to understand or have impact from the original. So it was nice that it was deepening of the world and deepening of the lore, and you got a lot of callbacks to both Live Ship and Farseer, particularly the Farseer, obviously. And then just, I don't know, there was just some emotional moments that were fantastic. There were twists and turns that I didn't expect. The way that the dragons lore was expanding, I'm just loving. And so I just had a really great time. And like, if everything in Realm of the Elderlings was like Tawny Man, I think I would like the overall experience more, but I still think that they're really great books. Obviously, I don't know that you could jump into Tawny Man without having read at least Farseer. You could potentially read it without reading Live Ship Traders, but that seems to be everybody's favorite. I just have very personal reasons why some of the events in book 3 kind of tainted that trilogy overall for me, unfortunately. But you would need the context of Farseer to really understand what's happening in Tawny Man. It's not like a trilogy that you could just dive headfirst in, and so this is technically at the earliest, book 6 of Fitz's journey, or book 9 of the overall Realm of the Elderlings, so I just don't want to give too much information away. But it was just fantastic. The pacing was good, the lore was good, there were some battle scenes that were exciting and fun, the context for earlier events was good, like it was just great. So that was my favorite book in the month of May. Please, if you feel like just leaving an emoji, I guess the Tawny Man trilogy has had some really fun cats, so give me a cat emoji if you just want to leave an emoji, or just like the video if you liked it. Comment if you would like to do so. If you want to talk any spoilers about any of these series, I would love to do so. Just make sure you say spoiler, hit a bunch of enters so we don't accidentally ruin a reading experience for anybody else. But that will do it for today's video. I hope you liked it, and I hope to talk to you again soon with my catch-up wrap-ups for June and July. But that's it for today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!